Hello again. I have a video for you today about introduction paragraphs. I think introductions and conclusions are probably, when I ask students what the most annoying part of writing an essay is, they'll almost always say introductions and conclusions. And I think that's for good reason. I think these, it's kind of been a recurring theme with me that a lot of the things about writing essays are taught really poorly throughout most of the education system. And introductions and conclusions, I think, are probably at the top of the list in terms of things that are just taught very badly. Um, okay, so I'm going to start with like some of the advice that you might have gotten in the past about introductions, especially from high school teachers. And then I'm going to give my best advice. Okay, so what have we been told about introduction paragraphs? I think the first thing that comes to mind is the idea that you need a hook, right? That you should have that your first sentence has to grab the reader's attention and like convince them that the rest of the essay is worth reading and interesting. That you have to interest the reader with your first sentence. This has always been very strange to me because when I think about it, like if I wrote a whole essay, right? If I wrote 3, 4, 5 pages, and you're just gonna read the first sentence and decide if you want to continue reading or not, like I don't really need you as a reader, right? You can kind of fuck off with that, right? Why it's such a hostile way, right? It's such a hostile way to imagine your reader, that they're gonna just judge you entirely on that first sentence and be like, oh well, this isn't interesting enough for me. I'm my time is so important. I can't waste it on your essay after this first sentence. It's like I just don't think that that's what readers are actually like. Like that's not how I'm reading your essay. I don't think that's how like your imagined audience would read your essay. Like I just don't think that's how anyone reads really. So I'm not a fan of the idea of a hook. Like they told us that you could do these things like have a quote from someone like Abraham Lincoln said that justice is whatever, or like maybe a worse version of this is people will quote like the dictionary, like Webster's defines justice as you know I don't think this is really helpful. I don't think that's even very interesting, honestly. um or like people say like ask a question, right? Start with a question. I think this can be done the right way. It can work to start with a question, but it's got to be like a serious question. It's got to be a real question that's going to make people think. It can't just be like maybe the worst example of this. I used to work at a tutoring place that like SAT stuff, but they also did younger students, and I had to work with this little girl who was in like second grade one time, and they had her write an essay about her favorite color. So how does she start off the essay? The first sentence is, "Do you have a favorite color?" And so yeah, I think that's what we want to avoid with the questions, right? You don't want it to be like a false question. You don't want it to be a question that someone can very easily answer yes or no to. You know, if you're going to start with a question, you want it to be some kind of deeper question that's going to make the audience think, or maybe something they haven't considered, or something that maybe leads them into a train of thought that'll get them to your argument or something like that. I wouldn't just ask like a simple yes or no questions because like, look, I'm asking a question. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of these things that they tell us about doing a hook are generally don't really work, and I think we know that. I think as writers, like we sense that it's kind of bullshit, this idea of a hook. So I would take some of the pressure off of that first sentence. I wouldn't worry about your reader going through the first sentence and then just abandoning the essay. If that's how they are, we don't need them. What can we do instead? I think one good framing to have, like for a first sentence or for an introduction, is kind of like many people think this, but actually, they're wrong, and this is the case. I think that's a good way to do it because I think that does like give someone a reason to read the essay, even though I think that's overstated how much we need to do that. But like, if what you're saying, if you start off the essay by saying like, a lot of people think this, but actually like they're wrong, then the reader might be like, oh well, I thought that, so now I'm going to continue reading or whatever. But again, I wouldn't really put too much pressure on the first sentence like that. Other things we can do for an introduction. I think we want to go from like something general to your more specific argument. So like whatever your topic is, you might want to say like a few sentences just about the topic itself, and then get into what your argument is going to be in this essay. If someone was writing an essay about like the environment or something, you could start off just with some general information maybe, or like background on the topic, and then get to like the specific thing that you're going to argue in this essay, right? Kind of lead up to the thesis. I would probably try to have the thesis in your first paragraph. It's not really not a hard and fast rule, and I think we've read essays probably that don't have the thesis in the first paragraph. But I think professors generally will expect the thesis to be in the first paragraph. And we've talked about the thesis, how it doesn't just have to be one sentence, it doesn't have to be the last sentence of the first paragraph. But you probably do want to give the audience a sense of your argument by the first paragraph. You do probably, I would say, want to like preview the argument. If you're writing like a standard like argument essay, then yes, I would say by the end of the first paragraph, the audience should know what your argument is and at least be able to see kind of where you're going to go in the rest of the essay. So yeah, I would say my best advice is to kind of start with the general stuff about the topic and then get to your specific argument and then kind of set up the rest of the paper a little bit. This still doesn't make them very easy, or doesn't make them easy to write them very long. But I would just focus on like, don't worry about the hook thing. Worry more just about showing the audience like what your argument's going to be and telling them, your thesis and stuff. Maybe my best piece of advice on writing an introduction paragraph is that you don't need to write it first. It doesn't have to be the first thing that you write. I think we're conditioned to do this mostly because we've had to write so many timed essays in our lives, like for the standardized tests, it'll give you like 40 minutes or whatever. Awful. But when you do that, obviously you have to write it in order, because it has to be done very quickly, so you have to do it in order. But we're writing our essays over the course of weeks and like a month even. So there's no need to start with the introduction because I think it can be good not to write the introduction first. I would try to have an idea of your thesis, like I've said, but sometimes we don't really understand our whole argument until we start writing our essay. So maybe once you start writing some of the body paragraphs, it like will click and you'll be like, oh, now I know what this essay is about. And then if you've gone through that, it'll be a lot easier to now write the introduction, right? Because sometimes we don't really know exactly what we want to say until we start saying it. I think that's something from the shitty first drafts essay. So like, don't feel like the introduction has to be the first thing that you write. Don't be afraid if you feel like it's easier to start with a body paragraph and then go back to the introduction. I think that can definitely work. I've done it before. I've written essays where I'll start with like gathering quotes, from like research, or if I'm writing about literature from like the story or whatever, and I'll just put the quotes on my Word doc, and then I'll kind of like explain the quotes and introduce them and like build my paragraphs like from the inside out around the quotes, and then eventually go back to do the introduction. So yes, I think that's kind of the best way for us to try to think about an intro paragraph. I think this is better than the way that they've given us before. So that's kind of for like any essay that we're doing, for like a standard essay. Now, for this narrative essay that we're working on right now, we have some different options, I think, because this is not a straight up argument essay. It's not a normal essay. So I think there's two main things that you can do for the introduction paragraph of a narrative essay. The first one is that you can kind of just start in the middle of the action. You can kind of just start with the story, and then and this is kind of, we're going to look at a sample essay this week, and this is kind of what the sample essay does. It just starts into the story, and then once you start reading through the story, then you get a sense of the message at one point there. I think that works for this kind of essay. For other kinds of essay, that doesn't work, but for a narrative essay, I think we can do that. So you can kind of start like, and I woke up and I had to go around my room and get to work or whatever, and then you can kind of start in the middle of the action and then introduce the argument a little bit later, or you can do kind of like an essay style introduction like I was just describing, where since our essays are about language, you could have some general stuff just about language and how it works, and then be like, and language is important because of talking back, or because of word choice, or because of culture, because of unfair treatment. And, now I'm going to tell you a story that shows this. That's an option. You could also use the kind of framing that I was mentioning of like, a lot of people think that language doesn't matter, but actually it kind of matters. So that could be another good way to kind of form your introduction. But yeah, I would do it either like start with the storytelling and then kind of like get to the argument a little bit later, or start off by explaining your argument and then be like, now I'm going to tell you a story. I think those are kind of the two best options here. All right, well, that's it for now. See you later.